Welcome to Your Questions Answered, this session where we are going to be answering your questions with BBC experts. So thank you very much for writing in. We've had lots of questions over Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. We're coming up to the third anniversary, of course. So we're joined by Vitaly Shevchenko from BBC Russian Monitoring, who is also, of course, the host of the podcast Ukrainecast. And Zhanna Bezpiatchuk from BBC Ukrainian joins us from Kyiv. Both of you, welcome to Your Questions Answered. And like I was saying, lots of questions. And, you know, we've been talking a lot about the geopolitics in Munich and the comments within when it comes to J.D. Vance, also Pete Hegseth. I think we're going to just start with some basics if we can. Vitaly, one of the questions that a lot of people have been writing to us is, why did Russia invade Ukraine in the first place? Just remind us of the history.
Well, the problem is that for a huge chunk of the Russian ruling class, if you like, and even society, they've not really accepted Ukraine as a truly independent state. For the way Russia sees itself right now, Ukraine being part of Russia is a key part of identity. Vladimir Putin, he keeps saying that Russians and Ukrainians are one people. Before the start of the full-scale invasion, he wrote an article about the historical unity of Ukrainians and Russians. So that kind of denies that Ukraine is independent, has its own language, culture, history, and that is at the root of Russia's ambition to have Ukraine. Some call it imperialism, some call it spurned lover syndrome, where this lover says, I'll make you mine or I will crush you. I believe that's the root of the problem, rather than claims that Ukraine becoming a NATO member would be a problem for Russia because Ukraine would attack Russia with NATO's help. Ukraine's NATO membership was a very distant prospect when Russia attacked Ukraine, just as distant as it is now, really.
Well, yes, especially given the kind of commentary that we're getting from Pete Hegseth and J.D. Vance. Just in terms of, Zhanna, another question that has popped up, was Ukraine ever actually a part of Russia? I guess this is kind of alluding back to the times of the Soviet era, Zhanna.
Yes, exactly. So first of all, Ukraine has never been a part of Russia as a modern state. The history of Ukraine is the part of the history of big European empires like the Russian Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire. If we take the period between the 18th century and the 20th century. Also before that, Ukraine, many its present-day territories, they were the part of Rzeczpospolita, the other state which united Polish people, Ukrainians, Jewish people, Lithuanians, and others. The statehood, as it's understood in the European culture and history, the first statehood in the present-day Ukrainian territories, it was created in the 9th century, and it was an ancient empire called Kievan Rus. And the capital of the Kievan Rus was the present-day capital of Ukraine, Kyiv. At that time, it was centuries ahead of Moscovia and then the Russian Empire, which were created respectively in the 16th and in the 18th centuries. So that's the actual history of Ukraine. And between two world wars, the first one and the second one, Ukraine, most of its territories, they were already the Soviet Republic, which was the part of the Soviet Union, and some of Ukrainian regions, they also belonged at that time to the other states, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Romania. And then after World War II, all Ukrainian territories, which then formed the independent state in 1991, they were included in the Soviet Republic, Ukrainian one, and it included also the Crimean Peninsula.
It just goes to show it's a complicated history that goes back so many years. Zhanna, thank you. Just when we're talking about the third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion, we have a question saying, when did Russia actually invade Crimea? Because that's a little bit more complicated, Vitaly.
It's hugely complicated. Russia's had a presence of some sort in Crimea for centuries, ever since it defeated the Turks. Now, Stalin, controversially, deported thousands of the indigenous population of Crimea, Crimean Tatars, after the Second World War. That solidified a Russian presence there. More recently, a key thing for Russia about Crimea was having its Black Sea Fleet based in Crimea. Now, that was kind of agreed between Russia and Ukraine. Everyone was happy until 2014, when suddenly little green men, as they were called, i.e. men in uniforms without insignia, men with guns, but Russia denied sending them there. I remember reports of helicopters flying and all these military streaming into Crimea, and Russia saying, well, it doesn't mean that they're as you can buy military uniforms in any shop. So that's when Russia invaded Crimea secretly. Fast forward to 2022, that's when Russia openly said, look, we are invading Ukraine. But when it comes to Crimea, the proper invasion of Crimea, secret or not, that's when it happened, 2014.
2014, yes, that's the date. That's the date that we all talk about. Vitaly, thank you. Just in terms of, we're looking at a map, Zhanna, but just talk us through the territory that Ukraine has lost. Put it into context for us.
Yes. So for now, we can definitely say that Ukraine has lost at least 26% of its territory. But it's more complicated picture. Why? Because the war in the Ukrainian territories, it has started in 2014 with the war in the east of Ukraine, Donbass, where Russia was already involved. It supported the illegal armed groups that fought against the Ukrainian army there. And by January 2021, Ukraine has already lost around 10% of its territory, and it included the Crimean Peninsula, which was annexed. And then, with 3 years of the full-scale invasion of the Russian Federation, Ukraine lost more territory. So now it's over 26%, and it includes the territories in the east, in the south of Ukraine, the Crimea itself. And there were some substantial land grabs by the Russian Federation in 2024. But at the same time, I have to highlight that Russia didn't manage to seize any regional centers, big regional cities in Ukraine, for example, and many Ukrainians believe that that's a big achievement of the Ukrainian army, that it managed to stop the Russian troops and to prevent even more land grabs.
And during all of these land grabs and the fighting, obviously, we've got the difficult question about deaths and casualties. And I wonder, one question that's come in is how many people have died on both sides? Vitaly, when it comes to losses in Russia, can you bring us up to date? OK, first thing I want to say is that it's really difficult to be sure, because Russia is not saying, obviously. I'll give you two sort of extremes, the low end and the high end. The low end comes from estimates compiled by our colleagues from BBC Russian, members, independent Russian journalists and volunteers, who are looking at confirmed reports from Russian media, for example, official reports of people, named people, confirmed as
having been killed in this war. So the number they've come up with is 93,000 confirmed Russian soldiers. Now, that's the low estimate, and I think everybody agrees that the realistic estimate is much higher. At the other extreme, the highest number that we've got, it comes from the Ukrainian military, and it includes Russian soldiers both killed and wounded as well. And the Ukrainian estimate is 885,000 Russian soldiers out of action, either killed or wounded.
And Zhanna, just in terms of similar numbers on Ukraine side, obviously for security reasons, it's difficult to get those numbers as well, just like it is for Russia.
Yes, exactly. We have to understand that during the war, most of these numbers, they are classified. But what we know for sure, just the latest number, which was provided by President Zelensky, 43,000 Ukrainian military were killed on the front line since the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion. Other sources, some of them independent, that the actual number is much, much higher. And just as Ukrainian, as a journalist, I travel across Ukraine quite often, and I see how these graveyards of the military graves, so where the soldiers and officers are buried, they grow very fast, and they are huge all across the country. What is also the reliable methodologically figure, that's the UN estimate of how many civilian Ukrainians were killed during the Russian invasion. They say that by the end of 2024, within almost 3 years of this war, at least 12,300 civilians were killed in Ukraine. But again, that's a very rough estimate, and definitely it's the actual number is higher, because many people were killed in the occupation, and thousands, over 10,000 at least people are missing in Ukraine, and their fate is unknown. And also we have to remember that there are Ukrainians that were killed in the Donbass before the Russian full-scale invasion, in the war that started in 2014, at least 13,000 people.
Zhanna, thank you. We're going to bring it to the conversations that we were having and witnessing today during the Munich Security Conference. Just in terms of, Vitaly, this peace plan, can you say what it is? Do we have a definitive idea?
We have no idea, to be honest, Kasia. The signals that we're getting from Donald Trump's camp are contradictory. On the 12th of February, we heard his defense secretary, Pete say that NATO membership and reclaiming Ukrainian territory is out of the question. Then his vice president, J.D. Vance, said that, well, deploying US troops to Ukraine is a possibility. It's military leverage. So that contradicted what the defense secretary said. And now we are also hearing from another official from Donald Trump's administration, John Cole, saying that, well, NATO membership, why not? Reclaiming territory, why not? So contradictory signals. We don't really know what Donald Trump is going to propose. Volodymyr Zelensky and J.D. Vance concluded their talks within the past hour or so, and all they said was that their negotiations were good and fruitful, but what that actually means, we don't really know.
Still so many unknowns. Just one thing that has been coming up, Zhanna, is this idea of minerals, a possibility of a deal being made between Ukraine and the United States over minerals. We've got one question saying, just what kind of minerals does Ukraine have?
Yeah, that's Actually, still question not clear enough even for Ukrainians themselves. Why? I'll explain. First of all, most of information about these deposits of minerals, it's secret. We know that there are deposits of really valuable minerals, for example, titanium or uranium, in the 3 eastern regions of Ukraine. 2 of them, Luhansk and Donetsk regions, they are actually now the front line, and they are partly occupied by Russia. So in order to explore these deposits fully, in order to extract these minerals, it's necessary to deoccupy, to liberate these territories. And the estimates are very different, very different. We've heard some estimate from the American president himself that the cost of these minerals, they can be around $500 billion. There are higher numbers, but still it's very preliminarily, very rough. And the war actually has to end with the victory of Ukraine in order to make possible the extraction of these minerals.
Zhanna, as always, thank you so much for talking us through it. And both of you, thank you very much for answering our audience's questions. Zhanna Bezpiatchuk from BBC Ukrainian in Kyiv, and also Vitaly Shevchenko, host of Ukrainecast, the podcast. If you want more on all of this, I'm sure you go in far more detail during the podcast. A great podcast, loads of incredible voices on there. If you have any questions for us then on your questions answered on BBC, just get in touch with us, your questions at bbc.co.uk. Write to us and we will do our best to answer all of your questions in a special episode like this one.